Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for our sixth module of the Birch Project's 10 training modules on supporting youth in schools and in the community, trainings for paraprofessionals and mentors. This module is titled Fostering Wellbeing of Students and Staff. If you tuned into our first 5 modules, you will have some foundational knowledge that this module will build on. And if you had not yet had the opportunity to check those modules out, we will review some here, but I encourage you to complete those as well to make sure you're set up for success with engagement across the tiers. Before beginning with our content, I'd like to introduce the Birch Project to those of you joining us for the first time for this module series. The Birch Project is a behavioral health integrated resources for children project. Its mission is to provide professional development and resources for schools, as well as to strengthen the coordination of behavioral health supports across school and community agencies. Birch Project is led by faculty members from UMass Boston and UMass Amherst and is sponsored by Boston Children's Hospital. For more information, please check out our website at umb.edu/birch. So my name is Catherine Kurtz, and I'm the project director of the Birch Project and a school psychologist by training. My research interests are related to helping to improve behavioral health systems with the goals of better supporting youth and staff. I'm also really interested in how to adapt interventions to make them more engaging and culturally and contextually relevant for our youth. I've had the good fortune of working with a number of very talented paraprofessionals and mentors over the years, and I'm so grateful for everything you all do to support our youth. The Birch team would also like to extend a huge thank you to all the paraprofessionals and mentors who made these modules possible. They provided us with critical insights into the work they do, which has greatly helped us develop the module you are about to participate in. So let's get started. Our learning objectives for this module are for participants to work on defining what well-being means to them, talk about the concept of self-care in context and how it is not and cannot be the same for everyone, how to foster the well-being of youth in practice, and how to build everyone's coping toolboxes with tools that work for them. If we think about the goals of this module in a prevent, teach, reinforce framework, we're going to talk about the importance of promoting our own well-being and the well-being of youth to establish a foundation. So we try to prevent challenges, feel better, and foster positive outcomes, including a healthy school or workplace climate for working and going to school. We know that when we as adults are dysregulated, not feeling well, or not caring for ourselves, it becomes really difficult to care for youth. We're going to discuss the concept of self-care, which is different for everyone, depending on our identities and what is possible given our context and the current systems in place. We're going to talk about and practice strategies we can add to our own coping toolboxes to foster our own well-being, particularly focused on the work setting, and strategies for teaching and supporting youth in fostering their own well-being. And we need to reinforce ourselves for engaging in this work by acknowledging our efforts. Like we discussed in our previous modules, we know that without applying a prevent, teach, reinforce framework, we are likely not to see much behavior change from adults or from youth. As a review, 3 big takeaways from Module 5 include that interventions can be adapted to be more culturally responsive and trauma-informed, and can be adapted to be used at Tier 2 or Tier 3, depending on the need. Remember that no one intervention is going to work for all youth, small groups or individuals. So we try to make sure to progress monitor to ensure that what we're doing is helping the youth. And that taking a culturally responsive and trauma-informed lens to view the challenges youth are experiencing helps us be better advocates for youth. Also, remembering to consider the natural supports and protective factors the youth has, because these can be excellent places to start building on to build up the youth's confidence, connections to school, and the community to build relationships with adults and peers and figure out activities they're interested in or what they find meaning in. All right, let's talk about self-care in context. There have been a lot of recent discussions on the importance of self-care as multiple pandemics, including racism, have continued to impact our society. Ari Acosta from the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network has an excellent presentation that you can access for free at the end of the slides of this presentation. Acosta talks about how having one idea of self-care or assuming that a self-care strategy works for all is an individualistic perspective with the cultural values of personal space, privacy, and detachment. Having this singular view can make other perspectives and approaches to self-care and well-being seem like they're not effective, helpful, or worthwhile. It negates practices and perspectives that have been used successfully by many, particularly those from historically marginalized communities. And it doesn't center self-care practices as healing that is grounded in social, cultural, and historical components. It can make people feel like they're doing self-care wrong or that they're not worthy or of the self-care that is coming from an individualistic perspective. Acosta suggests to recognize the social, historical, and cultural components of healing. We try to expand our view of who we are and where we come from, try to reconnect and reroot ourselves in our racial, ethnic identity, and explore, honor, and foster practices that are culturally ours. For some, healing self-care may be grounding exercises, breathing, spending time with a circle of peers, storytelling, talking to elders, spending time with people or in a place where you feel you belong, developing pride in your identity, including your culture, and getting to know your history, or for some, spirituality. Instead of focusing solely on self-care, we're going to broaden our discussion to talk about collective well-being for ourselves as professionals and for our youth. Let's spend a few minutes thinking about what well-being means to each of us. What comes to mind when you think about well-being? How do you define it? What factors do you think impact well-being for you? What about the youth and families you work with? ClassroomWise is a free resource that has a ton of helpful information about well-being for educators and professionals working with youth. There is no one definition of well-being. Wellness used to just refer to physical health, but now has broadened to include a number of elements related to positive or adaptive health. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines wellness to include components of physical, emotional, social, occupational, intellectual, environmental, financial, and spiritual domains. Like self-care and healing practices, perceptions and aspirations of being well differ for families and cultures. There might be differences in ideas around how to express and manage emotions, take care of the body, independence versus interdependence, what roles, what careers are most valued, and how to find meaning in life. ClassroomWise focuses on 5 components of well-being: physical health, such as nutrition or sleep; occupational health, which refers to creating adaptive life roles; intellectual health, which they define as continuing to grow and find meaning as one grows; social health, like creating positive social relationships and having positive social connections; and emotional health, like feeling comfortable emotions and managing distressing emotions adaptively. ClassroomWise recognizes that a number of factors influence the well-being of professionals, including the culture of the organization, school, workplace, climate, resources and supports that are available, work demands placed on you, and the relationship one has with their boss or supervisor. So what are some ways to foster our well-being as professionals? Systematic oppression, intergenerational trauma, racism, microaggressions, and other stressors such as lack of access to basic needs and human rights, such as legal, health, social protection, manifest in a variety of ways in the workplace, and without a doubt, negatively impact well-being at work. We want to keep these in mind as we think about ways to foster well-being at work. We should also be considering trauma and how that might impact well-being of ourselves, colleagues, or youth. And when we say trauma, we might be referring to an acute event, such as the death of a family member, maybe due to COVID, or chronic events like continued exposure to community violence, or intergenerational, sometimes called historical trauma, like from colonization and slavery, where a group of people across generations continue to suffer the effects of the experience. Secondary traumatic stress refers to when one experiences a high level of distress when they hear about the traumatic experiences of someone else. It's a common experience in human service. Trauma impacts the well-being of youth and the professionals who support them. Trauma impacts how the brain is wired and can impact all of the components of well-being. We really need to approach all of our interactions from a trauma-informed lens, since we're unsure what stress and trauma an individual may be experiencing. Approaching our work from a prevent, teach, reinforce framework is a way to increase predictability, consistency, and center building relationships, all of which are trauma-informed strategies. When individuals have experienced chronic stress and trauma, one of the best protective factors for them is a stable and predictable and positive relationship. Individuals who have experienced trauma can feel better over time, but it often takes many, many repeated positive and safe interactions with trusted people over time. While you may not feel you have much agency or power in changing the systems that negatively impact the well-being of staff at your workplace, we're going to suggest some strategies that may help to foster well-being as staff in the workplace that may be within our spheres of influence. Like, how can we set up the environment for success? And what strategies can we teach ourselves to foster our own well-being and the well-being of our coworkers? Coping skills are one way. They can help us manage emotions in healthy and safe ways that foster our well-being. And as we've mentioned before, different skills work for different people. There are 4 major categories of coping tools. The first category are problem-focused, and that one works on trying to address the problem contributing to the stress. Here's an example scenario. You're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of tasks that you have to complete this week at work, and you have a lot going on in your personal life to deal with this week too. What are some examples of coping strategies you might try? Here are some we thought of. Try to seek supervision to help prioritize tasks and determine if any tasks can wait until next week. Making a list on your phone or in a notebook so you don't have to try to remember everything, which can decrease your cognitive load or the information you have to remember. It can be stressful for some people if we try to remember too many things at one time. Setting a timer for a task you have to complete and just working on the task for a set period of time before taking a break or moving on to another task. The second category of coping tools are social coping and involve seeking support from your community, whoever that may be, to help manage stress. Let's apply the same example scenario of you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of tasks that you have to complete this week at work, and you have a lot going on in your personal life to deal with this week too. What are some examples of coping strategies you might try? Here are some we thought of. Seeking supervision around stress management related to work demands. Asking a colleague if you can work on a task together. Pursuing home community support around stress management. This might be a spiritual leader, friends, family, or often workplaces have employee assistant programs where you can pursue counseling or other supports, or planning a fun activity or social connection to look forward to. The third category of coping tools are emotion focused, with the goal of reducing uncomfortable emotions. Let's apply an example scenario of there's a youth you work with who's displaying a high level of challenging, unsafe behaviors on a daily basis. You are often asked to respond when the youth is escalated. You can typically help the youth calm down, but it takes a long time, and other staff are often frustrated that you haven't been available. What are some examples of coping strategies you might try? Here are some we thought of. How about positive thinking or reframing of the scenario as this youth seems to trust me, and staff seem to think things go better when I'm able to be present with the classroom or setting. How about finding someone to laugh with? Sometimes we just need to laugh. Or switching staff and taking a break. Sometimes distraction can help, distraction by another task or interaction. Maybe trying to increase our understanding or acceptance by trying to understand our response to the student or client's behavior in the context of our own experiences in school, the system, community, or family. Also talking to a supervisor about frustrations. You are not alone in feeling frustrated with a student or youth who is displaying a high level of challenging behaviors. The fourth category of coping tools are meaning focused, and that the goal is trying to understand the situation more or make meaning out of it. Let's practice the same scenario of there's a student or youth you work with who is displaying a high level of challenging, unsafe behaviors on a daily basis. You are often asked to respond when the youth is escalated. You can typically help the youth calm down, but it takes a long time, and other staff are often frustrated that you haven't been available. What are examples of coping strategies you might try? How about seek supervision around your own stress related to responding, and also around the youth's needs? Are there particular behaviors that are triggering for you? Can another staff switch with you if those behaviors occur? Would it help to create a schedule of who responds to the youth at which times? Think about sharing the schedule with the student in some capacity so it's predictable for them. Speaking to trusted colleagues who've been through this can be helpful. Maybe pursuing professional development or training, or talking to your supervisor or administrator around having more training for yourself or the staff as a whole. Maybe consider joining a professional association that's made up of those who have a similar professional role to you. Or is there a way for you to share your interests and strengths with your workplace? Think about if you have capacity for becoming more involved at your school or agency so you can feel more empowered and included in decisions. Share your feedback and experiences to inform organizational changes. All right, so we've talked about fostering our own well-being as staff. Many of the same principles apply to supporting youth, including approaching our work with youth through a trauma-informed lens, and making sure we're building off their strengths. Who's available to support them, whether it's family members, community members, or staff at school, and other protective factors they have. Maybe they're great at math, athletic, funny, and able to connect with others, have a strong relationship with their family. The more we can build off of natural supports they already have and protective factors, the more successful our interventions will be and the better the youth will feel. We want to help the youth to work on developing self-confidence in who they are, building relationships with peers and adults, learning to recognize their own growth and progress. That may be small steps. Finding an activity they enjoy in school and outside of school, exploring the different parts of their identity, practicing tasks they find difficult, developing skills to cope with setbacks and upsetting events, finding an activity, job, relationship they find meaningful, and dreaming and hoping for their future. So we're going to focus on the coping skills part in this module. Many of these are not new coping skills. They have been used by cultures for many years, like grounding and deep breathing, talking to elders or someone in their social network, storytelling or journaling. Coping tools are not enough to foster well-being. They can support our positive well-being physically, emotionally, socially, occupationally, and intellectually, though. They can help youth to manage emotions adaptively, solve problems, organize themselves, and stay on track to meet the goals they and their families have for them. Visual supports can be really helpful for our youth who feel better communicating non-verbally or visually, or who like to pair visual with verbal communication. Mood meters are great for older elementary, middle, and high schoolers and adults. Many can be accessed for free online. Identifying our emotions is a great step in determining how to respond or manage the emotion in a way that feels safe. If you have a therapist, clinician, school psychologist, counselor, social worker, occupational therapist, speech therapist, special education teacher, ABA therapist, and other individuals who support students with their communication and identification of emotions on your team, they may be able to help you track down visuals to use. Also, there are some resources listed at the end of this presentation too. Here are some other helpful coping tools. Sensory tools like fidgets or Velcro, walking, talking, journaling or drawing, blowing bubbles. Again, some of these tools are more distracting than helpful for youth. In any case, all youth need to be taught how to use these coping tools so they're not distracting. Consider supporting youth in understanding the link between how what we think impacts our emotions and then how we act. Help them identify helpful versus unhelpful thinking. Maybe using the language of helpful thoughts their inner coach sends them versus unhelpful thoughts their inner critic sends them, or sunshine thoughts versus cloudy thoughts. Can they look at the evidence to determine if there is evidence supporting the thought? I read that deep breathing is like taking a shower for inside your body, which I think is useful to think about for myself and the youth I work with. For example, elevator breathing is taking your hand and breathing in like you're going up the floors of an elevator, and then counting backward and breathing out to come down the floors. I usually let youth pick what floor we breathe up to 10. You should be able to find YouTube videos of examples of the other relaxation exercises on this slide. The more we can help youth feel grounded in and that their bodies, emotions, and thoughts are tied together, the better. Youth who have social, emotional, and behavioral challenges can often feel out of control and like they're not connected or don't have control of their bodies. Bibliotherapy, or using literature to help children learn social, emotional, behavioral skills, as well as cope with upsetting events, can be hugely helpful. It's a great way to introduce a topic if we aren't sure the words to use as adults. Also a strategy to follow the youth's lead and see what thoughts or questions are coming up for them after reading a book. One of my favorite books is How Full Is Your Bucket for Kids. Language we use with students can be incredibly powerful, including for youth who have experienced chronic stress and trauma. Anne Garrity, a clinician and researcher, came up with the concept of developmental repair, and the use of language with youth is a key component of this approach for youth with challenges, including when you notice them beginning to escalate, but also as a prevention tool when they're not escalated. Language like, you can do hard things, come stand by me so I can help. Let's use your coping toolbox together, and it will feel better to learn. Some individuals find coping skills apps helpful, and here are a couple ideas for how to explore more around available apps. All right, so here are our 3 big takeaways from this module. Well-being and self-care are impacted by culture, history, systems, and social factors. There are some strategies that can help us at work as staff when we're experiencing a stressor. And there are some strategies we can support youth in developing to add to their coping toolboxes. Jackson is back again. Take a minute to review his behaviors here. Consider what emotions and thoughts Jackson's behaviors would bring up for you. I know for me, bolting or running away is really stressful, and it brings up thoughts of safety for the youth and my responsibility for them. So I think I would frequently be worried about Jackson bolting. Do you think you would need to utilize a coping strategy to cope with the stress of having Jackson in the classroom? If so, what are examples of what might be helpful to make the situation feel better for staff and for Jackson? What coping strategies might be helpful for Jackson? There's no one right answer to this. I think I would try to make sure we had a plan in place, including who I would let know if the bolting occurred, so that way I wasn't alone in responding. I would also try to make sure we had a plan to debrief any unsafe behaviors as a staff. For the bolting behavior, I think Jackson may benefit from having an agreed upon break card he can show staff in a spot in the building that multiple staff are aware of that he can go to if he needs a break from the classroom. I would also try to introduce a break spot in the classroom away from other students to hopefully avoid him leaving the classroom or hiding under his desk. I would try to make sure the break spot had like tangibles or sensory tools he could use, maybe Legos or something sensory related, that he could hopefully start practicing emotionally regulating with my support. Here are some helpful resources to learn more about supporting our well-being as staff and the well-being of youth we work with. Thank you for participating in the 6th module. Please complete the evaluation form by visiting the link on this slide. We would love to hear your feedback so we can improve the modules in the future. At our website, umb.edu/birch, you can sign up for our subscription list to get more information on best practices related to supporting the behavioral health needs and well-being of youth. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out with thoughts or questions. Thank you for all you do to support youth in this state. Take care.